Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the archaeologist, now let's get into the travels.
So this video, I'm not doing any traveling. No, instead I thought today would be a good idea to talk about archaeology itself, specifically about what we do, how we tend to go about it, and how we know what we know. So I'm going to take this opportunity to go in depth into science behind archaeology and its proper practice. So let's start with what archaeology is. Now the obvious answer is the study of ancient humans and civilizations. Right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Okay, no. Clearly we're going to go deeper than that. After all, what is archaeology if you can't dig a little deeper? And for this, I'm going to look at some of the sites I've done, including commercial archaeology sites around Britain and Tel Bet Shemesh in Israel. Now, archaeology is the study of ancient human civilization, but it's done in a bit more of a methodical and scientific way. It is a bridge between the sciences, in fact. To study archaeology, we need to know something about everything: economics, statistics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, mythology, linguistics, art, botany, politics, ecology, architecture, and of course the standard big three of history, geography, and anthropology. Some schools of thought place archaeology primarily as a branch of anthropology. This comes from Louis Binford, who was a great anthropologist, but he didn't quite understand archaeology, so he published a paper diminishing it. But the truth is, archaeology is far more complex and all-encompassing than anthropology, and it's not just a proud archaeologist talking. Anthropology is far more limited in scope, and it depends on living cultures, while archaeology is far more tied into geographic science and history. We study ancient environments and extinct landscapes just as much as we deal with old cultures, but also we study the impact humans have had on the environment and the impact it has had on us. We also study how our society has adapted to the various changes that we make to that environment. And this is really important in a world of climate change. So there are two basic ways to dig an archaeology site. Personally, I'm partial to the wheeler-kenyon method, so are most archaeologists. It's named after the two archaeologists who invented it. Now, the wheeler-kenyon method is to dig a site like a checkerboard. The size of the square very much depends on the size of the site, ranging from about 1 to 2 meters to up to 20 meters in some of the larger city sites. The smaller sites tend to look like a checkerboard with only every diagonal square being dug, while these larger sites will dig every square, leaving roughly a half meter on either side for a bulk. And why do we leave a bulk? Believe it or not, that's actually the most important part of archaeology, as it gives us stratigraphy. Now, if you haven't heard of stratigraphy already, stratigraphy is layers of dirt, the newest thing being on the top, the oldest on the bottom. And it's important to record this because this tells us how old an artifact is. When something is found in context, that means that it has a stratigraphic location, unlike surface finds or out-of-context finds, which do not. As for digging in the grid, that allows us to record the XY axis so we can pinpoint its exact location on the site. And this is important to note because we can use this information. If we find a lot of iron slag here, we can judge this was probably a metal workshop. If we get a lot of loom weights over here, it was probably an area where they made textiles. And if we get a good mix of burnt pots and material over here, we can judge it was a kitchen. And the blanks get filled in. Of course, this is all in ideal conditions. Naturally, it will all depend on the nature of the dig if it's on a timeline, and especially if it's commercial or academic. Academic digs tend to be the most ideal conditions because the best way to get funding is naturally to have students do it for course credit and a small tuition fee. Commercial digs tend to have time and contractual constraints and often have obligations to dig as much of the site as possible, which is where the second method comes in. The way that's probably more familiar in Britain especially is the simple half section. This means that we get down to the archaeological layer, find a feature, and then section it into one half, digging that half. From there, our recording goes much the same, taking note of the archaeological feature and everything found inside it. We can figure out what these materials are, usually through analysis and previous research. Speaking of which, you may have heard of licking bones to tell them apart from other material. This is a half-truth. Students tend to be the worst offenders of this behavior, and it's true that bone will stick to your tongue while rock and ceramic tend not to, but honestly there are so many more professional ways to tell the difference. One of the biggest reasons for licking I've witnessed is to see the cross-section. Now, rocks look like rocks, but pots will show a very clear sign of, well, here they are side by side. It's easy to tell when they're clean, but not so much when they're dirty. But it's dangerous to lick artifacts. They've been in the ground for centuries and will be crawling with bacteria. That being said, I've seen professionals do it. You know a feature is finished when you've hit the natural layer. And while this can be a bit tricky to find, to a trained eye it does become easier. Here's one of the more obvious walls where you can see a stratigraphic layer surrounded by the fill and the natural lining it. But can you spot the natural layer on this photo? It's here. And this one is even harder. But on the ground, digging the site for days, you start to accommodate your thinking to it, and even professionals can get tripped up in the very beginning by difficult sites. So now we know how sites are recorded, it's time to answer the question, how do we determine the age? Radiocarbon dates are accurate to within about 50,000 years, which isn't a problem for most archaeology, but can pose a problem for the older sites and for paleontology, for which other methods can be used. But even so, these methods are expensive, time-consuming, and require enough material to be in good condition. And this is where seriation comes in. This was a method invented before the days of radiocarbon dates, which basically involved putting pieces together. You've seen this photo of evolution, right? Well, now picture that that photo looked more like this and you had to put it together in a logical order. Except it's far more complicated and with pot rims and other artifacts. Here's a textbook example. And once you know the age of these pots and determine their order, you can easily get a very good estimate of what the style dates to. We know this sherd came before this one because it's continually found in the lower stratigraphic layer. And then we can take every pot of the same style to be of roughly the same age. Now, have you spotted an issue with this method? Because there actually are a few. This is a common issue that archaeologists run into, the pots equals people paradox. Of course, it applies to more than just pots, but the pot's the best example. What it basically says is that it assumes that one style of pot is associated with one time and one culture, and this is of course not true. Have a look in yours and your friends' cupboards to see the flaw in that. It's an issue that almost literally divides the archaeological community, and one which we have been trying to rectify with mixed success. On the one hand, you cannot associate crockery with culture. On the other hand, when we have a pot that we know is Greek, and it suddenly starts to appear in massive numbers in an area that definitely was not Greek before that point, what do you make of it? Culture is and always has been a gray area to see materially. It's a problem archaeology has always had and probably always will have if we're honest. At the end of the day, it's about finding the right balance. I've seen very professional archaeologists who have sworn by the shape of arrowheads to date Native American cultures, and others who have sworn a sudden influx of cultural material to make up a third of the whole complex means nothing at all. Archaeologists also don't tend to usually find the big stuff, and honestly, we're not really looking for it. The temple-robbing days of colonial adventurism are behind us. We're not seeking the golden idols and running from boulders, and in fact, if I were to enter one of these complex temples, the first thing I'd be doing would be studying everything else. If an ancient temple had traps this complicated, why on earth am I concerned only with the gold? The temple tells us far more about these people than the idol ever will. We've just made the discovery of the millennium. I mean, seriously, how does this work? And this? And you're only concerned with this thing? For shame. Honestly, most of what we find are small fragments and ancient garbage. And how do we know where to dig? Again, this is a question that doesn't really have an answer. In the commercial world, we do a general survey over the affected area in a series of test trenches. This has actually become much easier in recent years due to the invention of ground-penetrating radar, but this is imperfect and digging is still needed. If we find something, we dig it. As to academic digs, these are usually university or state-sponsored, meaning that they're usually areas of great interest which we already know existed. UNESCO sites, ancient cities, and such. And an awful lot of it is found by accident. We do try to work with residents who act as our first line of communication. Most of us really are good to work with, and we don't want to step on any toes, so please do share your discoveries with us if you find them. Which brings us to our final section. Why is this important? It's easy to dismiss archaeology, especially when it involves things that are long gone and which were rarely written down. Archaeology can often be used by non-archaeologists to peddle political narratives, and this can be an issue. It's an issue we're aware of, but also one we can't really avoid. For example, in 2015, then Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said that a jug found at Bet Shemesh contained the biblical name of Ishbal, and that meant that a Jewish state had always existed in Israel. He then directly linked this to an attack on anti-occupation Palestinian politicians. Now, granted, exactly what he meant by anti-occupation is vague because Israelis do have a right to live in peace as much as Palestinians do. But given Bennett's history of using hateful rhetoric, I doubt he meant anything so purely defensive as we all have a right to life. And I use this example because it's particularly close to me, because I dug at Bet Shemesh. I was there the very day he made that comment, digging on that same site. Imagine my shock at seeing them use this work of myself, my mentors, my colleagues, to stoke hatred and division. But sadly, this behavior is not limited to today or to Israel. There is a fascination dictators seem to have with archaeology, especially when it comes to legitimizing their poor actions. And you might be wondering then, what good can archaeology put into the world? Well, nobody goes into a job to justify hatred and suppression. Well, almost nobody. Sadly, you don't have to dig that hard to find excuses to justify human suffering. And just as you can't write off physics for producing the atom bomb or fault evolutionary biology for leading to eugenics, you also can't blame archaeology for the actions of the hateful. So what is archaeology really about, and what good does it do for the world? We have changed historical narratives in the past before in ways I explored in my very first video, but anyone using archaeology to divide us or to justify nationalism has got it backwards. Archaeology doesn't show how we are different, but how we have always been the same. Since time immemorial, we have been living in diverse societies, which is why dictators have always found it easy to spread fear of diversity. And that is the great irony of Bennett's statement. Because the name Ishbal is not Jewish. It means fire of Baal, making the name Phoenician. Every country has been diverse. It's seen migration. Anyone who believes their ethnicity was ever 100% pure insert nation here is deluded. Archaeology allows us to see the vastness of human history just as astronomers see the vastness of the cosmos. We can see the larger picture, the wide mosaic of human expression, how we've improved each other, how we've improved our world, and also how we've torn it down. When you do archaeology, you are putting yourself into this person's shoes. And it's not like anthropology, where you can witness a living culture and speak to people, nor is it like history, where it's all written out for you. You are genuinely trying to get into the mind of this ancient person, which helps you to develop empathy and expands your mind. It challenges your views and forces you to have a perspective on your own culture. Digging up even a small potsherd, knowing you are the first person to hold it since whoever dropped it millennia ago, it gives you a direct connection, sharing a bond with someone who has otherwise been long forgotten. It preserves the history of the unwritten, it remembers what we forgot to record, and it corrects the accounts of the autocrats and the dictators. History is written by the winners, but archaeology is left behind by the masses, and that will always be a more honest view. Because they are us. It is our connection to ourselves. And that is beautiful. Anyway, that really is all for today. If you think I missed anything, or have an idea for a topic or a question you would like me to answer in a future video, please leave a comment down below. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. I'm the Archaeologist, and in the next video, we'll return to the travels.